shifting away from the traditional IT organization into the line of businesses. The sales leads, the marketing leads, even HR are driving technology investments. So with that as the context, how is the marketer's relationship with technology evolving?
Yeah, so you're dead on, Alex. So if we look at the 4 key megatrends that we talked about earlier in the technology session, they have a huge impact on the marketer from both.
Remind me of the 4 megatrends.
The 4 megatrends being mobile.
Test.
Exactly. Mobile, social, cloud, and big data are the 4 technology megatrends. So it has an impact on how the customer engages with your enterprise, and it has an impact on how you work internally as well. So what we're seeing is that marketers are being brought into more technology conversations, and they're using technology to connect with customers and to adapt much more differently than they have in the past. We see marketing budgets growing relative to IT budgets. We see a lot of investment in big data and analytics. And so each of those, as we look at the marketer's relationship with technology, they now have to manage all these channels, and they're making point solution purchases in order to do that. Or they're doing one of 3 things. They're becoming technologists on the side. They're bringing in roles like chief marketing technologist or marketing operations director or something along those lines, which is a hybrid technology marketing role.
It's a little bit like what Laura in the early technology track was showing us, where that customer service manager was using social technologies. I mean, it was pretty impressive.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're here to keep us honest and be that voice of the marketer.
Exactly. And then the third area, the thing that they're doing is they're forming great partnerships with IT. So I know we have a lot of technical folks that are still joining us. I hope that you take from the next hour 20, hour 25 that we have some tips and tricks on how you can work with the marketers in your organization.
All right, excellent. Well, with that, why don't we move on? I think we've got a great video, and we're going to talk after this short break and video. Welcome back to the Roadmap virtual event. We are coming to you live from Microsoft Production Studios in Redmond. I'm your host, Alex Bradley. Our next guest and keynote speaker is IDC's Vice President of CMO Advisory Services, Kathleen Shaw. Kathleen, welcome.
Thank you, Alex. I want to start off the conversation today with a description of an experience that I recently had. My husband and I were fortunate enough to be able to visit down at a really nice hotel down in Carmel, California on the Central Coast. And when we arrived at the hotel, it was just a really wonderful experience. They were treating us like royalty. They knew to expect us. They gave us a sheet of paper that gave us restaurants in the area and whether or not we were going to have like little gifts or free drinks or whatever. We went up to our room. It was wonderful. It was a kind of a high-touch, concierge-level experience that customers would really like to have during their buying experiences. But they also would like to have the experience of being able to have the control and the convenience of being online.
They treat you like an individual.
Yeah, they want to treat you like an instant, but also to have this super high value, immersive kind of an experience. So that marriage of the high touch that comes with the real world and the convenience and control of the internet, that's the ideal situation that we're all looking for. But if you think about what's really happening online, things are actually going in the opposite direction. Because in the early days of mediated conversations, when most of the touches were happening through things like print ads, it's a very, very small portion of the interactions that a buyer would have with a brand that were happening in a situation that wasn't live. But if you fast forward to today and you think about just the dozens and maybe moving into the hundreds of channels and all the different kinds, while the convenience and the control might be happening in the digital line, we definitely have lost a lot of the high touch value that comes in a live conversation. So this is really becoming much, much more than it ever has been before. So what I want to do for the next 15 minutes or so is I want to talk to you and to talk to the folks that are joining us today about what we see at IDC CMO Advisory Service. We talk to a lot of marketers every year, literally hundreds of them, and we want to be able to share what are some of the practices that leading companies are doing to create this kind of an immersive experience and unite it once again, because as we've been talking about, buyers are super powerful today, and
knowledge is power.
Knowledge is absolutely power. So let's talk about some of the things that some of the leaders are doing. So this data comes from a study that IDC does every year. It's called our Tech Marketing Benchmark. It does come from technology companies, but technology companies tend to be leaders in the business-to-business sales world. And what we do is we look for investments that different tech companies are doing in their marketing, and then we score them. So we score the company performance, and we score to see things like market share and things like revenue growth, etc. And then we look at how does that correlate with marketing practices to separate the leaders from everybody else. And one of the things that we're discovering, and was just dramatic this year, is the huge, huge advantage that the leaders are getting from the technology investments. So there's the investment in the technology itself, as well as the investment that's being made in the people who are going to manage the technology.
How do you define that skill readiness advantage?
The skill readiness advantage is by having people who are technically competent on the staff of the company. So this is a huge, huge difference between the leaders and everybody else. That's one of the things that we find. There's this technology infrastructure that's required to try to bring all of this stuff back together. And I'll be talking about that a little bit more in a minute. But it's not just the technology. It is also collaboration. Because the more fractured that marketing is, the more fractured the experience that the customer has. So what we see is that companies are today trapped in traditional silos that are matched to media. This is the way that marketing has been organized forever, right? You have advertising.
This is the same people, let alone the same team.
Right, exactly. And within that, for example, in advertising or social media or email, you not only have this discussion and these teams that are but you have purpose-built content, which is, of course, the messaging, and you also have a unique audience for each of those. So if we keep going down the traditional path, the more channels that we add, the more fragmented the experience becomes. So what we see is that not only is the automation improving, but also we want to be able to see that the organizational structure is also changing. So what we see in the organizational structure of leading companies is that they are switching from the silo-based structure to what we call systems thinking marketing. So what is systems thinking? Well, systems thinking is when you think about how the different pieces of an organization affect the whole. So it's sort of a biological paradigm, so like a reef or an ecosystem, even a human body, where different pieces are going to interplay with each other. And there's three main components in a marketing system. There's the content piece, the data piece, and the channel piece. And I'll talk about each of those individually and what's happened in each one. But first, let me sort of counter that or explain what that might mean. So if you and I are having this conversation, right, and I'm listening with my ears and I'm speaking with my voice, when you go online and take that human being out of the conversation, you have to listen with data and speak with content, and you speak through these interaction channels. So these are the fundamental elements that need to be replicated in order to be able to create that ease of the conversation that happens in real life and move that online so that I can get the experience as a buyer like I did from the concierge that was at the nice hotel. So let me take you through each of these three areas independently and talk about what's happening in each one. So first off, let's talk about content. And we start with content because marketers usually start with the idea of messaging. That's typically the most important thing that they see. And instead of having purpose-built content which works with advertising or works with social media or et cetera, what we see is companies putting together organizational structures that look at the entire life cycle of content from development through distribution through reuse and create catalogs of reusable modular content. And it takes some new, not only new organizational structures and some new processes, but also some new skill sets. Not only product marketing, which we've always worked with, but also audience ambassadors, journalists. There's a whole bunch of marketing operations roles that need to come into play.
Dare I say analysts?
Analysts, because third-party content is definitely something that is very, very highly respected. So right, internal content would be included in this, as well as some of the external content. So this is the voice that we were talking about. And one of the things that happens, and if anyone's moved down the role of content marketing, they'll notice that in digital world, you need a lot more content than you do. When we're having this conversation, you ask me a question, I respond with something new and fresh, hopefully, right? Because it's called talking.
Yep.
Well, online, you just can't keep repeating yourself, right?
It's not only online, it's also the cloud. When I think of my day job with Microsoft Office, we used to do futures content once every 2 or 3 years. Now we're doing it every 2 to 3 months.
Yeah.
It's massively different.
Every time that someone clicks on the internet, that is a signal that a new piece of content has to be delivered. And that has to be fresh and it has to be responsive. So it's a much, much different situation than it has been in the past. So companies are not really ready for this. In our research, again, this comes from our tech marketing benchmark that we do every year, we see that in the tech companies that we study, about a third of them, a little less than a third, have these shared services organizational structure set up to even start down this road. So we're just at the very, very beginnings of this. We're still very, very much fragmented. There's a lot of opportunity for companies to accelerate their efforts and be able to be disruptive in their environment. So let's talk about the data piece next. That's the next one. To me, the data piece is probably the most exciting because it turns on the lights, right? It allows you to see things that you've never ever seen before. And
data by itself is nothing. It's the insights you drive.
It's the insights, right? And there's huge amounts of data that are being driven today. IDC says that in 2020 there's going to be 44 trillion gigabytes of data. Now, only about 22% of that is any value, but today only about 3% is being really used. So it's the gap between the 22% and the 3% is where the advantage will become.
And I suppose who has access to that data as well, not only the data existing and the tools, but who has access to it.
Who has access to it and the kinds of data that you need. Because mostly what we're interested in is behavioral data. Human behavior, which is what we're really looking at online, is not really quite as mysterious as people have always thought it was. It's kind of like using a time-lapse photography. If you look at a plant growing, if you're just staring at it, it doesn't look like it's doing much. But if you look at it under time-lapse and it's brought down to human scale, all of a sudden you see it really is growing fast and wiggly. Same thing is happening on human behavior. You can see those patterns. And it's not just marketing data that's important, because what needs to happen is that you need to be able to take not only the marketing data, but also be able to add CRM data from sales and financial data and customer support data. The more data that you have, big data is really your friend, you're going to get a clearer and clearer picture of what your customer is doing online. The third category here is those pesky channels, the ones that are continuing to get farther and farther away from that immersive experience and get farther and more fractured. And we do need to bring these together. And what needs to happen here is that the various channels, I mean, at IDC, we're tracking a lot of interaction technology, and there's like 47 different kinds of technology that are being offered to be able to manage all these different interaction channels. We still need specialists. We still need people who know advertising. We still need people who know social media. But like an orchestra, we want them to work together for a single piece of music that the customer really experiences in a really positive way. So I want to show you something that we put together to kind of help people think about all the various interaction channels that are there. You know, you have the paid kinds of channels like advertising. You have the owned kind of channels like a website. You have the earned like social media or editorial. And those are things that marketing people think of all the time. But in the future, and yeah, actually even today is emerging, that mobile and the Internet of Things is starting to bring the offline world together with the online world. So things like sales calls, for example, or events, store, you know, sitting in your car. I mean, all those things have an opportunity to be included in an immersive experience in the future.
Yeah, I think people can be watching this on their mobile devices, and, you know, as an example, and interacting as well.
Absolutely. So social and mobile become attributes of the channel. Right now, we think of them as separate channels, but eventually, as we move towards getting that immersive experience, they just become attributes, and it all kind of mushes together. So you need something really cohesive and collaborative in order to be able to manage that well. So I put together a couple of examples for people so they can kind of get an idea of where the first place that you might go. Because I think jumping from an independent silos straight into that immersive experience might feel a little daunting. But actually, it's not that difficult to get started, and many companies are starting to do that. So here's a couple of examples. A consumer example. You might have a TV ad with a hashtag from Twitter. And you go on Twitter, and then there's a link within one of the tweets. You click through, you get a coupon that's delivered to your smartphone, and then you walk into the store and redeem the coupon. So that's an example of a chain of multi-channel or cross-channel interactions that could create a whole cohesive experience for a consumer. In the business world, this is one probably a lot of our audience would be familiar with. You get an email, and you click through in the email. It takes you to a microsite on a web. Fill out a form, takes you to a YouTube video where you watch a product demo, and there's a phone number, and then that phone number will take you to a call center where a salesperson could work with you. So these are examples of basic cross-channel chain examples. So companies are putting together organizations like new structures like campaign management and things like that to help take all these different interactions. But you do need to have the content and the data in somewhat of a collaborative form to begin with in order to be able to use them in a way that can create this, again, more interactive type of an experience. So there's a lot happening. I know we've talked, and that everybody knows that there's a huge amount of marketing transformation that's happening. Buyers are more empowered. And because they're more empowered, they're demanding this immersive experience of being able to have the convenience and control of digital married with that high-touch, really wonderful experience that they have in the real world. But that as we're adding more channels, instead of getting closer to that, in most companies it's going more the other direction, adding some convenience and control, but moving away from the high-touch experience. But leading marketers are automating and collaborating in order to pull these things together and be able to move it in the direction that the customer wants. So my advice to, based on the experience that I've had working with all these marketers over the years and my own personal experience, I have a few things that I've noticed make really, really good place to move ahead on. So first off, it's really important that people overinvest in the operational infrastructure. So we talked not only about the technology, but also into the organizational structures and processes. The art of marketing is always going to be important. And we have to pay attention, particularly as buyers become more empowered. It's important to talk to them in their own voice. But if you don't have the operational infrastructure to conduct the digital media, the digital conversation, it is technology. If you don't have that, then all of the wonderful things that you're doing with buyer's voice is for nothing. So we tell people, for right now at least, 25% art, 75% science.
Mm-hmm.
You know, right now we've got some making up for lost time to
Sounds
do.
about right.
The second thing that we make a recommendation is that because this is a really technical conversation, and the content and particularly the data that are really important here, and the integration that has to happen in the interaction channels, there is no way that marketing is going to be able to do this on their own. No way. Even though there are wonderful things that you can do with the cloud, there's a lot more independence that can happen, but it's still, we find they don't get too far down the road before IT has to come in.
Well, it's also, we had Vice President Gore came to one of our speaker series here on campus, and he talked about, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And
Yes.
There's only so far that marketing can go by themselves before they need to get into those processes and whatnot that IT can help them with.
Absolutely. And when you start adding those different data parts from other parts of the organization, and you start wanting to look at a full 360 view and realize the promise that CRM and stuff has been promising since the 90s.
Yeah, and you're having this conversation, and ultimately what you're capturing, if you're successful, is personally identifiable information, which is a valuable asset. You have to look at the data breaches that retailers are seeing, have seen recently, to know that marketing by itself probably needs some IT chops to secure and protect that data.
Exactly. So what we see companies doing in order to be able to make this happen is we see that both marketing and IT have to come out of their comfort zones. Right, so marketing is used to kind of working externally, kind of working on their own. Maybe it's kind of the wild, wild west, particularly now that things are being transformed. And they kind of think that IT people are a little slow, maybe a little stodgy, not moving, not prioritizing marketing. And the IT people, on the other hand, think that marketing is just chasing after the next bright, shiny object.
Mm-hmm.
But both of them kind of have to come, not necessarily meet in the middle. We're not talking about a homogenization. We're talking about collaboration. So having each bring to the table what they do best, but finding new ways to work together. One customer that I have has funded a business intelligence office between marketing and IT, where they, succeed and fail together. We've seen new organizational structures where people report to the same person, like a chief growth officer. So there's some very interesting things that are happening there, but definitely marketing and IT have to come together.
I think it's interesting when I talk to technologists, they see that role of technology as changing, being more of a business enabler. And I think the cloud is one of the things that, whilst some IT pros fear it, by moving to the cloud and getting rid of the operational aspect of running an exchange server for email, that doesn't, most companies don't then get rid of that IT pro. That frees up the IT pro to focus on value-added activities like social, for example, versus plumbing.
Yeah, and all of those things, social, mobile, and cloud especially, big data to an extent, but marketing and all customer relationships, that's the skin of the business, right? So you can't do this without cloud. I mean, part of the reason why we're having this conversation is because cloud technology is now available. So I think IT people, fear or not, are going to have to accept that that's what's happening. So I have one final piece of advice, and then we'll see if we have some questions. And that is that the hardest part is the culture that has to change in these companies. Alignment is not easy. Collaboration is not easy.
So you can't just throw money at it.
No, you can't, unfortunately. It takes leadership and it takes courage to be able to move in that direction. And everybody needs to, again, come out of their comfort zone, and there needs to be some formal change processes that have to go together. You have to make sure that you are rewarding people and measuring them in the right way in order to be able to move things in the direction. But in order to be able to deliver that kind of immersive experience that I talked about and be able to move it to a place where customers want, the company itself has to become less fragmented. It has to move out of its silos and into a more systemic way of looking at their world and looking at their customers. So I would challenge, our audience to take away just a couple of these little hints of how they can move forward to this more automated, more collaborated world, and start walking on this path, because there is a huge benefit to both their company and their customer for success in this area.
Great. Well, thank you, Kathleen. You mentioned earlier on this concept of working like an orchestra. Lots of different sort of groups working together. Now, an orchestra has sheet music. To keep everybody on the same page, literally.
Yep.
For us as marketeers, working with the different parts of the business, what's your advice to companies in terms of how you create that that effect, that network effect?
Well, you bring up the idea of sheet music, and it's not a heck of a lot different than that. There has to be this very formal process. The maturity of any kind of an organization goes through coming up with agreed on processes. Even how you're going to be agile, that is a process itself. Be able to come up with standards. You have to get, communication is a big issue. Making sure that you're using the same terms, for example, for things. Being able to understand that different processes, and everybody knows what they're supposed to do when certain things, when customers do certain things. So in effect, you have to create that sheet music. And automation is a huge tool for this, because you can instantiate then that sheet music in the automation and really help it. It's a really important guide. But it is that process, and that's where the operation.
So there's no way the marketeers can get away without some process.
No, and they actually have processes today. They just forgot that they do, because they've learned it all along. So they have to definitely be process oriented.
All right. So I love that you talked about really focusing and over-investing on infrastructure, spending, as it were, to enable this.
At least for now.
One of the things that should enable is around this sort of content, that enables content marketing at the end of the day. What do you think is the baseline in terms of the building blocks that enable successful content marketing today?
Well, there's a couple different ways to think about, content marketing is still a term that a lot of people are trying to invent, if you will, or trying to figure out, how to describe it. So when I talk about the infrastructure, I'm now thinking about more of the content management, the asset management. So a content management system, for